Joined once again by Scott Bennett. Last week, of course, Scott and I were discussing the incredibly hot button issue of the New Zealand mosque shooting. You might even say, Scott, that is basically too hot to handle. We were Patreon only last week. How are you?
I'm doing good, pal. I think you did a fabulous job last week on the New Zealand shooting, and it's I know we're going to talk about the other subjects, but we always are wise to circle the wagons and keep that fresh in people's mind that New Zealand was, I think, one of the greatest false flags we've seen in history after 9/11 because of its blatant impossibility and its obvious political agenda for gun confiscation and diminishment of pro-Trump voters. There's all sorts of psychological operations components in that. So we always have to remind people and keep alert. And if anyone wants, the video, they can contact me at shellgamewhistleblower.com because they've deleted my Facebook page and my YouTube page as a result of this.
Whoa.
So besides, action will take against Facebook and YouTube for conspiring with this blatant false flag. People can't reach me through Facebook and YouTube, so they have to do it through the website. But
wow,
I'm setting up.
I didn't know that they deleted your Facebook page. Well, you and I are usually communicating through Skype or telephone, but let's talk about this for a second because this is the first I'm hearing of it. Now, as I said, of course, you and I were conducting that investigation into the video evidence on Patreon because I had felt that it was going to be a little too much for general audiences, and your Patreon page is still active, isn't it?
Yeah, Patreon is still active.
Okay, so people can go to patreon.com/shellgame and support Scott on there, and they can still see what he's got in terms of videos. And yeah, there it is. It's at the top. That's our analysis of the New Zealand PSYOP. So people can still get that on patreon.com, and of course it's on patreon.com/shellgame and patreon.com/crowdsource the truth. So that's interesting, Scott, that they took it down from YouTube. I do want to qualify what we're saying, of course, because we're analyzing video evidence, and we've shown that there are a number of basically irrefutable points in there that the video evidence is essentially a special effects movie. It's not a documentary video of a shooting. However, that does not mean that a shooting did not take place elsewhere. That
Right.
does not mean that people were not murdered in New Zealand. I think in part, Scott, and I feel like we touched on this, but I think as you're pointing out right now, one of the goals of these types of psychological operations is to take people like you and I, get us to comment on this stuff, and then give these social media companies an opportunity to wipe us off the internet.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. This is an intimidation tactic. This is an attempt to browbeat people into abandoning any sort of impulse to question and to expose, and that's why they're putting on a 10 to 14 year jail sentence on anyone who shares the video and anyone who shares the manifesto.
In New Zealand, not in the United States.
Yeah. Correct, in New Zealand. But it certainly would be what the Democrats would do within the United States if they assumed a tyrannical fascist power, which is, again, why most people voted for Trump, because their guts were telling them this is the road we're going. And I may not like Trump. I personally think he's okay, but there's a lot of people who don't. But when you weigh your residential choices, that really comes to it. Are you dealing with someone who wants to protect your liberty and to expand it domestically, or someone that doesn't trust you and thinks you are a cog in a wheel and you need to be controlled and manipulated and shaped in whatever way the utopian state wants? That's the fundamental difference between the Democrat, socialist, fascist, and the Republican, conservative, libertarian type.
Yeah, and Scott, right now the House, whoops, Scott, did we lose you there? Scott? Whoa, what happened to Scott? There you go, you're back. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you good.
That was weird. Man, I tell you, you and I always have strange interference on our conversations. What I was about to say is, just before we began, I was watching the House Intelligence Committee. They're having a hearing right now, still about, Russiagate. And of course, House Republicans openly called on Adam Schiff to resign due to him being an imbecile, and basically insisting that there is evidence, even though an investigation found there wasn't. And the man is sitting there reading into the record in Congress, rumor, conjecture, lies, nonsense from, whatever news media he's gotten, and he's arriving at conclusions of his own that are not substantiated by an investigation. I think he should resign.
Well, let's touch on the Mueller-Russiagate, because it does set the stage for the next major topic, which is the Russian, Venezuela, United States, Syria policy face down. I look at the entire Mueller probe, Russiagate, the Russia spy thing, hoax, the Hillary Clinton, deep state, Brennan, FBI, DOJ operation. I look at it with just a tongue-in-cheek sort of laughter, because in all respects I was present before this ever started, and you know this, Jason, and it's baffling and surprising, but at the same time laughable, because in 2012 we reported and exposed the deep state on its terrorist financing, Hillary Clinton getting money from Switzerland, from UBS, from Saudi Arabia, all these countries to invest in her and facilitate this juggernaut that they expected for the next 8 years, right, when she got in after Obama, would conquer the world. It really was a Nazi Gestapo sort of a rabid social Democrat agenda. And they started in Libya, they started in Ukraine, they started in Syria. And the financing of this was all part of a Saudi Arabian, Qatar, Sunni, Shia, Salafi, Wahhabi, not Shia, Wahhabi, Salafist agenda. And when Brad and I reported this and reported it to Mattis and Flynn and many congressmen and senators and such, and I saw all of this scrambling about, and then when I was released from prison in 2014, I immediately hit the road and started reporting this. And I'll never forget one of the key speeches in 2015, in July of 2015. A month later, the Russians contacted the producer, Russian TV, and I won't say who else, because who else do we really know, but Russians contacted the producer of the speech I gave, the event I gave, and said, we're looking at the Scott Bennett book, we're looking at his video, we're looking at all of his material and shell game. Is he real? Did this happen? And the producer said, yeah, I did. I can vouch for him. I know him. And immediately after that, Putin started making interventions into Syria. Wow. And then this whole Russian collusion thing and U.S. people helping Russians and all this, people were saying, who knew me, Scott, are you the Russian colluder? Or are they calling you the Russian colluder? And, I have to say, not in any negative way, but I certainly was on RT. I certainly appeared on Peter Labelle's show several times and talked about this. I certainly was on Sputnik. I certainly was on Russian 360, as well as Press TV and others, talking about the same story, the whole shell game. And it really was the foundation for all of the crimes that Hillary Clinton did in 2009. Uranium Gate, all that came afterwards. It was really the terrorist financing that were planning on running their ISIS-Daesh operations in the Middle East and continuing conquest. So, this has been going on for a while, and it's been reported to people. It's been reported to Congressman Mark Desaulniers and his staff, Ryan Thomas Brown, and Senator Johnson and his investigator. And I've got all the videos to prove it. I've got the conversations to prove it. And I've talked to Michael Cohen about it, and I've got the videos of that. So all of this has been going on for a long, long time. And now it's sort of coming to a head that there was no Trump campaign collusion. There was the invention of this Russian hoax because it fit the explanation of why Russia was reporting all this secret terrorist financing in Clinton and Eric Holder and Lanny Brewer and Barack Obama activities and conspiracies. So in a sense, it's partly true, but in another sense, it was all a psyop and a spin to try and delegitimize the president, undermine him, spy on him. They spied on Michael Cohen immediately after I talked to him in 2015 and 2016, most likely because the spy agencies were picking up a lot of this stuff. As I've said before, the CIA came and talked to me using Michael Isikoff and Tom Hamburger. So all this was in the know, Jason. All of this was in the know for us who worked in government, military, and the stuff, and people like you who dig and report and analyze. So when this has run its gamut, they were trying desperately to undermine the president. They did successfully, I think, cripple his pro-Russian impulses and instincts by immediately creating the box to put him in. And Obama and Brennan, and all of this is coming out now. Catherine Herridge with her additional tweets. There's like 40 pages of additional tweets that were never given to Congress that Catherine Herridge on Fox News is now analyzing.
Texts, you mean, from Lisa Page, right? Texts.
And I've been reading those, and they're very informative. They should have been released. They weren't, but you see on these texts the real John Brennan and not Michael Cohen, but the other Cohen, who was the assistant deputy director, I think, of the CIA at the time, Cohen and Brennan and Peter Strzok meeting to what? To coordinate with the director of national intelligence the report that would indicate Russia was meddling with the elections, which was completely false. Buying Facebook pages and advertisements and stuff is different.
Absurd. I mean, how much influence can they have? We've seen the CEO of Google in his testimony before Congress say that $4,700 were paid for. I mean, that's laughable.
Yeah.
And frankly, it's not illegal. If you're in Russia and you don't like Hillary Clinton, you can do business with Facebook. We're not at war with Russia. Russia can buy all the Facebook ads. They could spend $4 billion buying Facebook ads saying don't vote for Hillary Clinton if that's what they choose to do. We're a free market. Buying ads is not clandestine activity.
I sent a letter to RT and people that I know there, and I said, this is what you should do before the election. This was like in October of 2016. I said, President Putin should write a letter to the American people, put it in the New York Times that says, we don't want war, we want friendship, vote for Donald Trump, don't vote for Hillary Clinton or we'll be at war. I wrote that letter to the Russian RT people, asking them, pleading with them to put this out there. So, you know,
did they do it?
No, no. Well, they didn't do that. They didn't do that, as I thought they should have. But the U.S. side invented all of this Russian hoax, and again, part of it's true, but of course, it wasn't a hoax. It wasn't a meddling in the election. It was an honest engagement with the political realities of what we're facing. But all of this is now going to be investigated with the failure of the Mueller probe. All of this now is going to come to the forefront, and trust me, all of this is going to be right smack in the faces of Jordan, of Nunes, of every Republican, of Lindsey Graham. If I have to go to Washington myself and pound on the door and take a camera and say, this is what you need to investigate now. This has been going on since 2012. I'll forgive you for being stupid or dumb or not having your phone on, but I'm telling you right now, you need to investigate this because it is the true deep state operations that Hillary Clinton was involved with. It's why we're in a mess in Syria. It's why we have all these problems over there, because they've been financing it.
Right, so and people can read all about that, Scott, in your book, Shell Game, that they can purchase by going to the website shellgamewhistleblower.com. Scott details all this terrorist financing, and as well as the remarkable story of his let's call it chance encounter with Brad Birkenfeld in prison. It really is an amazing story. So you're saying that you presented this information to Jim Jordan and Devin Nunes and they did not run it up the chain?
Well, I won't go too far into what they've done and not done because I don't want to give intelligence to bad guys who are listening, but I'll say they have it, and the Trump people have it. The White House has it. Senators and congressmen that I've talked to, including Senator Dick Black, knows it intimately, and he and I have talked about it intimately. Remember, the whole the Washington, D.C. People and apparatus and people in the politics, they know the deep corruption and the game over there. They just don't publicly say it. They can't publicly say it, or they don't have the courage to publicly say it. But they know about this. But, you know, the only thing that matters, Jason, is now with the Russian Mueller probe falling apart, basically saying there was no collusion or evidence of collusion that warrants a crime. You can't charge him with a crime. There was no crime, period. And everyone says, okay, there was no crime. So for 2 years or 2.5 years or 3 years, you've been prosecuting people like Manafort, like Stone, like Papadopoulos, or all these people, Corsi, with process crimes, with meeting with you and not answering questions the right way, like General Flynn. You charge him 8 years or 8 months later. All of this stuff is laughable. It seems politically tinged, and it was based on the false FISA warrant and Carter Page situation where they were inventing a false FISA warrant, taking it to the court, and that is serious. You know that it's fraud on the court. I think everything is going to be thrown out as fruit of the poisonous tree. If I was an attorney, I would argue a 2255 motion, which is ineffective assistance to counsel. The counsel should have said to the court, this case should be thrown out as fruit of the poisonous tree because everything flowed from a fake FISA warrant. Now, they can also introduce that as newly discovered evidence, Jason, and the whole cases can be re-entered. You can go into court and say, there's newly discovered evidence. We discovered the gun that killed this guy that you say, my client killed with a knife. We've got the gun to match the ballistics kind of thing. Now they have the Mueller probe and the FISA court falsity, so they can theoretically reintroduce the cases of Manafort and all these people and throw them out on the process of this was fruit of the poisonous tree. It was unconstitutional what they did. That's more of a legal analysis.
Let me ask you this about Mueller, Scott, because I think a lot of people recall that Ray McGovern asked Robert Mueller about parallel construction. And Robert Mueller said he's all for it. For people who maybe don't know that term, parallel construction is where they sort of decide what the crime is and then go looking for evidence to fill in, exactly how they got there. And after the conversation I had just the other night with Michael Moore and Larry Klayman and Dr. Corsi on our Patreon-only show, More Pain, it seems very much like these witnesses were selected, these subpoenaed witnesses were selected in an effort to try to construct a narrative to, tie people to WikiLeaks, and there are certain foregone conclusions that people like Adam Schiff are continuing to force down the throats of the American public, even right now. At this very moment, while you and I are on this live stream, there is a House Intel Committee hearing happening about this Russia investigation. So even though Robert Mueller, a guy who was the director of the FBI, the second longest term of any FBI director in history, 2-year investigation, millions, tens of millions of dollars, experienced DOJ members, prosecutors, etc., Schiff and the maniac Democrats are still not satisfied. They want to defy the Constitution. They want to forget about the concept of being innocent until proven guilty, and they just want to investigate until they find something that is sufficiently believable to convince people that they should impeach Donald Trump. And it's really damaging U.S. diplomatic relations with Russia, which brings us to the central focus of today's conversation. We have had a lot of conversations about Venezuela and separately about Syria. But now, of course, Donald Trump has announced that the United States recognizes Israeli ownership of the Golan Heights, an area that's been disputed, since 1967 or something like that. I got to tell you something. I'm not that up on my Israeli history, and my fear is that a lot of the self-appointed pundits around the internet also are not. They just sort of take a side based on their personal feelings or personal ideologies or religion or whatever, and then they just decide which party they're going to hate. I've just begun to research exactly what the hell is going on over there and try to understand. I don't like to comment. There are a lot of people that have tried to implore me to comment on this issue simply because I'm an American Jew. And I would prefer to know the facts of the situation and sort of learn where the pinch points are and what the disagreements are before I even have an opinion about it, because I just don't know that much about it at all.
Yeah. Well, I share that, of course. We don't want to say anything in error, and we always want to be truthful. And I share my lack of pristine clarity on the Golan Heights 1967 war situation. I've asked for people that I know who are older than I to try and find out exactly, precisely every dimension of the 67 war as it relates to the Golan Heights, to really look and understand this issue for the purpose of deciding what is the fairest, safest, most normal path for the political decision making of the United States in this subject matter. Because again, we always come back to the United States. We're American citizens. What happens over there is going to happen to our people in our country here, as we've seen in Southeast Asia in the 1960s, as we've seen in all of the wars where young people have been sent over and come back in body bags or pieces. Not all of them, of course, but we don't want to run roughshod into these areas and do political actions that could be very counterproductive. Now, in a snapshot, the 1967 war, 1967, you had a war between the Six-Day War, as it was called, and you had Israel fighting against, I believe it was Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and I'm not sure. I don't think Turkey was in there, but of course, probably ideologically
it was. The bordering countries all sort of attacked at the same time, because they resented the fact that basically the United Nations, the U.S., the United Kingdom said, okay, this is going to be the Jewish state, and create all this turmoil. But rather than going into a history lesson, I want to talk about what the latest moves, Donald Trump basically this morning or yesterday or something told Putin to get out of Venezuela. So, I mean, a lot of us voted for Donald Trump because he was talking about no war in Syria, but it just seems to have moved to Venezuela. We've got Russia aligned with Venezuela and Syria, and this is another interesting point, Scott, because just a year ago at this point, we were seeing pictures of Donald Trump making out with Putin or being a marionette or being in his pocket, but that doesn't seem consistent with the actions that Trump is taking, recognizing Israel's ownership of the Golan Heights, further stoking disruption in Syria, and going so hard against Venezuela. Obviously, the United States is trying to disrupt the political situation in Syria and unseat Maduro. This doesn't seem to be the type of thing that Putin's puppet or friend or somebody getting paid off by him would want to do.
Well, let's look at the origin of Russian-U.S. relations with regards to the Trump campaign, the Trump presidency. When in December of 2016, when Trump was entering in office, of course, we know that Barack Obama, in coordination with John Brennan and Cohen, the deputy director of CIA, and the director of national intelligence, Clapper, all of these people conspired to create the Russian meddling analysis intelligence document and release it simultaneously with the President Obama's decision to shut down the Russian consulate and properties. So that was a coordinated intelligence effort, not based on truth, but based on political calculation, that this would eventually be used to open up opportunities to exploit for Comey and the other deep state people at McCabe and Peter Strzok. Peter Strzok was involved with this. So all of this was a coordinated plan. And it was setting off a time bomb, Jason. So they set off a time bomb in December of 2016 that resulted in Obama. His last actions were to declare diplomatic war against Russia. He confiscated their consulates and their land in Maryland and San Francisco and elsewhere.
It was ridiculous.
And he did that. So he put Trump instantly in this position. And they all say this. They regurgitate that. Trump inherited, Obama passed these things along. Yeah, he passed off poison.
He manufactured he manufactured a conflict, basically. And when Michael Flynn just, it's much different than if you or I went over to some, country that the United States doesn't have good diplomatic relations with and started like doing something, this guy's the incoming national security advisor. He's got a relationship with Kislyak. He says to him on the phone, don't overreact to this Obama thing. We'll be in there in 2 weeks and we'll talk. This is a reasonable thing for the guy to do to benefit the people of the United States and the diplomatic relations with Russia. He's not saying send me a briefcase with $250,000. It's not like he met him at the Howard Johnson's hotel. He's talking in the White House or wherever he was, Trump Tower, some official capacity, and they've made, this is what I really resent about Adam Schiff, is that he still categorizes that as some sort of espionage operation, but yet when Obama says to Medvedev on a hot mic, hey, after I get reelected, we'll be able to do all kinds of stuff, or I'll have more flexibility or whatever, that's totally all right. I mean, Adam Schiff is out of his mind.
Yeah, you're very right in that. They regurgitate lies and political lies because that's the only thing they can do, Jason. Really, they have to. It was said, Gingrich said it last night. They have to keep throwing up the confetti of Russia collusion and anti-Russian this and conspiracy. They have to, because none of the other substance works for them, the American public. Not the Green New Deal, not socialism, not any of the other things that they espouse. So the Russian collusion hoax is the last gasp of trying to spark fear and animosity in America. And it works. And the military-industrial complex, a lot of the high-level generals back that because their whole existence revolves around war. And the safest war is the one that doesn't really exist but always could, and that is the war with Russia. All these generals know that, and it's an easy retirement. Hey, we'll pretend we're at war with Russia. We're never going to go to fight because they're too big and tough, but we're just going to use that to gain our pensions. Yeah. So Trump inherited this bomb, and and then it was released. It was like a dirty bomb. All the radiation of that started spreading in the news media and CNN and MSNBC and Rachel Maddow and all these clowns on mainstream media. We're making this snowball roll bigger and bigger and downhill. There's Russia. Russia's involved. Trump may have Russia connections. There may be girls pissing on hotel beds and blah, blah, blah. And the next thing, Trump starts to have to adopt harsh Russian rhetoric and harsh Russian treatment. He doubles down on taking the embassies and the consulates and the property. He doesn't report it. He expels Russian diplomat people. He puts RT on the list of a foreign intelligence agency. Remember, RT
Did he do that?
Then had to register as a foreign intelligence asset. That was all bad.
They should make CNN do that.
What's that?
They should make CNN do that.
Well, yeah.
Communist News Network. So, Scott, the activities that are going on in Venezuela and in Syria, they just reek of John Bolton, don't they? I mean, this guy is a neocon to the bone, military-industrial servant, basically. And so, Trump, I think, is sort of driven by this ingrained personality trait where he's a tough negotiator and he wants to be tough. And so, telling Putin to get out of Venezuela, I mean, they're not going to be shaking hands in Helsinki this week. It's a much different posture that he's taking.
Well, the Trump susceptibility to pressure, as we established, came out of these actions from Obama, and they set him on a course, and this course has been continued ever since. And I think it's been a shallow and wrong course, but in a sense, he had to do it, and he said he's had to do it because otherwise they would say, aha, he is a Russian spy. We do have to impeach. And remember, they can impeach him for anything. So that was a very precarious situation. So he started, remember he fired the missiles into Syria?
Yes.
Even though the White Hat chemical attack was exposed as being more MI6 and not a legitimate Syrian thing.
A
So
BBC
Trump
producer came out and said that recently,
Yes.
that it's a known hoax. So now we've got people saying like, oh, how can Trump question our 17 intelligence agencies? Well, they're the ones that told us it was a chemical attack right away. People like you and I and other smart people who have independent news outlets on social media were pointing out evidence that contradicted what these intelligence agencies were saying. And of course, you know, just the same people that we're talking about, John Brennan and all these other nut jobs who obviously were trying to get Trump out of there to protect their own butts for what they've been doing under Obama, were the ones who were telling him, go bomb Syria.
Yeah. Well, the original intelligence document in 2016 in December was only put together by the DNI and a couple people, CIA, and they didn't bring in the Defense Intelligence Agency, the military. They didn't bring in a military analyst to assess the report, to assess the legitimacy of the Russian intervention, for a reason, because John Bolton was, John Brennan was the one who was putting this together with people in the Department of Justice and CIA and FBI. They were all putting this report together, so it was all a scam from the beginning. But Trump, in his engagements with Putin in Syria, and now we see in Venezuela, I think it's important to remember, he said last night this, no one's been tougher on Russia than I. No one's been tougher than Russia and I. Okay, we understand you've been tough, but you've been tough for the wrong reasons, and you've been tough when you didn't need to be. 86% of the American people, took a Fox News poll, I think it was on Laura Ingraham, 86% of the people said China is the greatest threat to America. 9% said Russia, 5% said North Korea. So the overwhelming majority of Americans do not view Russia as a threat. They view China as a threat. Yet the military-industrial complex and all of these agencies were desperate to continue hostility with Russia. And Newt Gingrich and all of these people were saying that when he went to Helsinki. Now, that being said, Trump does speak double talk. He does speak out of one side of his mouth for the cameras, for the politicians, for the neocons. Remember Lindsey Graham and all these people that are around him. Half of these people are rats, are bottom feeders, are liars themselves. And Lindsey Graham is no angel. In fact, he's quite the opposite in his personal life. But these people, as much as they may be trying to manipulate Trump by saying we're going to expose the Russian collusion hoax and Mueller's hoax, we're going to put all these people in jail, they, on the other side of the coin, they're saying we hate Russia and we're going to go to war with Russia. We're going to put them in their place. We're going to crush them. We're going to eventually dominate them. And I think that's a failed policy. It's inconsistent with the American people. And now we see Syria and Russia, basically Russia intervening and defeating ISIS and Daesh. Yeah, you can say the United States did too, but really it was because of Russia stepping in and working with Syria, Iran, and the Russian forces there that contained and pushed back the Syrian forces. Turkey has now adopted, I think, a very anti-U.S. stance. They stay in NATO for political purposes, but they're angry at the United States for destabilizing the lira, the Turkish currency. They're angry at the United States for declaring the Golan Heights belonging to Israel. Now, we don't want a war in Israel and between Israel and Syria. Nobody wants to war at all. And I think Trump's motivation, perhaps, was to create a buffer zone to keep Israel from being hit. However, that stirred up a lot of problems. He can still win a political victory by encouraging the Israelis and the Syrians to make the Golan Heights a neutral zone, perhaps, or something to that effect, saying we're not going to tolerate conflict on this area. So, you know, Trump did an executive action. He declared Golan belonging to Syria, belonging to Israel, to protect Israel, and he's won a lot of political base for that. Let's never forget, all of the Christian Zionist political base in America now, you know, loves Trump because he's done these prophetic sort of actions. Now, it stirred up a lot of controversy, if not animosity, in the other nations. Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Syria, they're all pissed off about this. And Russia has said, in response to the Venezuelan U.S. statement, when Trump was in the Oval Office with the wife of Guaido, a little petite girl, Trump says to a question, Russia needs to get out.
Yeah.
Russia needs to get out. Now, he's saying that for all the audience who want to hear that, but you know Putin, he's shaking his head and he's laughing and he's chuckling and he says, we know that Trump's saying that for the deep state bureaucracy. But
Does
in reality,
Putin know that?
Yeah, I think so.
This woman looks like she's 20. That's Guaido's wife.
Doesn't she? Yeah, she's real small.
She looks nervous to be there.
Yeah, she did. She does indeed. She does indeed.
Now, Scott, but, some of our viewers here in the comments are upset that I've described Trump's policy in Syria as schizophrenic. I understood the colloquial meaning of that word to indicate.
Well, I think that's an accurate term. Actually, yeah. I think that's an accurate term. I've used that many a time because when you say you're going to do one thing and do something else, you're a hypocrite. But it's also hypocrisy is a sign of schizophrenia. We're talking about. I'm not saying Trump's a schizophrenic, but I'm saying the policy.
Using it figuratively, right? The policy is schizophrenic.
It is a political schizophrenia. It's political hypocrisy because the American people voted for Trump to get us out of Syria and end these regime change wars.
And lock her up. Hashtag lock her up.
And lock her up.
Let's get to business here.
Don't think the American people aren't going to hold his feet accountable when he gets closer to the election. And hopefully he's smart enough to start the process to say, 6 months before the election, we've discovered all of this and we have to prosecute it, or else we have no honor as a society, as a justice department. These people have done so many bad criminal acts against Americans with all of these activities. And I mean, the whole thing with Hillary Clinton and Shell Game, that is a case. This is evidence that could be delivered and prosecuted. And Hillary Clinton would go to jail for everything in this book, period. And people would testify. Snowden would be there. Birkenfeld would be there. WikiLeaks, Julian Assange would be called to testify because they all play a role. But getting back to Syria, Trump...
Well, I don't think any of those guys want to come to the United States for fear of being assassinated, but people should go to shellgamewhistleblower.com and purchase the book so they can read these details for themselves and also learn more about Scott and the other books that he's written. But it's stunning evidence that you reveal in the book, Scott. And so I know you don't want to go into too many details, but there's been some strange things going on with Devin Nunes lately in this lawsuit he's brought against Twitter. He was the chairman previously of the House Intelligence Committee. Why didn't he bring this out right away?
Their political calculations probably had a list of items that were on the top, and you can only sing one song at a time. And I think he was committed, first of all, to the evaporation or the destruction of the Mueller Russian hoax, Russian intervention campaign.
He did a great job there, I have to say.
He did. And now he's come out and exposed the Facebook and the YouTube, and I think it was Twitter.
Well, wait a minute. Let me stop you for a second, because I disagree that he's exposed that. Everybody knew about that already, and what he's done is he's brought, as a basically private citizen, he has brought a civil lawsuit using the same lawyer that Robert David Steele is using in a defamation suit against me that has no basis in fact or law. This lawyer, Stephen S. Biss, has been sanctioned by the Virginia State Bar for his direct involvement in a $21 million financial fraud for which he lost his legal license for 1 year, and during that period of suspension continued to practice law, getting sanctioned again. Seems a little bit like political suicide for Devin Nunes to associate himself with such a person. Why would Devin Nunes not, as a sitting congressman, say, hey, this is all happening to me on Twitter. We need to modernize this Communications Decency Act, Section 230, that allows companies like Twitter and YouTube and Facebook to hide behind this indemnity and for them to basically enable, let's face it, intelligence operatives, even if they're private individuals or any kind of political operative, to conduct a campaign on these social media platforms totally anonymously. We don't know who they are. We don't know how many different accounts they can control. People will say they want to protect the anonymity, the pamphleteers during the revolution, etc. We need to consider how the evolution of technology changes that, because, you know, a pamphleteer might have been anonymous, but their ability to conduct an operation like that was sort of balanced by the limited number of pamphlets you could create and hand out. One person could create thousands of fake accounts, disseminate false and even, potentially criminally defamatory or libelous material, conduct harassment campaigns on these platforms, and they have no accountability whatsoever. I think Devin Nunes would have been much more effective to lock arms with fellow Republican Josh Hawley of Missouri, who's a senator who's proposed updates and modernizations to this Communications Decency Act, Section 230, and we could still preserve people's rights while limiting the ability of those that would misuse these platforms and holding some of the companies accountable. I don't think Devin Nunes can demand that a company whose product is a piece of software, I don't think he can reasonably demand for them to turn over all their algorithms and tell us how your product works. I think there can be oversight. I think there can be legislation that regulates how these things work, but his demands are ridiculous. The lawsuit is basically guaranteed to fail, and he's brought it with a lawyer who, in my opinion, should be disbarred. Very bad form by Nunes.
Well, most of these politicians are not multitaskers. They're not really that smart. They can focus on one issue. They've got a staff, a team of people helping them on those one issues. So with regards to this, Nunes, may have been pushed into this, and he could have been susceptible to this. We don't know. I don't know. I haven't studied that. But I will say the government can only act where there's illegal damage done to citizens. That's the whole premise of the Constitution and discriminatory laws. There is a legal challenge to the discrimination that is imposed against conservatives by Facebook, by YouTube, by Google. That's a legitimate case. And myself and Jim Fetzer and Don Braun and many others who have been deleted or suspended or sanctioned by Facebook, by YouTube, because of the conservative nature or the vitality or the incendiary potential of telling the truth to people in a sizzling, punching way, doesn't seem to impact the sensitivities and delicate, effeminate nature of Facebook in a way that they feel very safe. So They respond with these actions, which is discriminatory. So that really is the only basis you have for bringing a case is you're discriminating against me and you're violating my constitutional rights. You're not a platform, you're a newspaper, and I'm taking you to court to let the court decide who's right.
But the problem is this CDA 230 is in place, and there are so many cases that have already been thrown out. The second a judge sees the type of complaint that you're describing, they're just going to say this is settled law and it's out. So the only option that remains is for Congress to say, you know what, in 1996 when CDA 230 was enacted, it was based on activities on a dial-up bulletin board system on, I think, Prodigy or something, CompuServe, something like that. And that was a really limited access platform that did not impact the general public's day-to-day life. It was a small niche group of users that were on there that did not have the widespread capability to sway political activity here in the United States. I think most people would agree that Donald Trump's use of Twitter, Alex Jones and other independent media outlets that utilize YouTube and Facebook and social media, even what you and I are doing right now, has become so pervasive. And in many cases, YouTube has supplanted broadcast television for a lot of people. We need to really revisit this CDA 230. And as you are saying, we need to say, look, you know what? If a company is going to preside over the content on their platform, and if it can be proven by users like yourself, Dr. Fetzer, certainly Larry Klayman, Dr. Corsi, Laura Loomer, all of these people, if a reasonable case can be brought that shows that these platforms are discriminating against a particular type of political ideology or whatever, they should not enjoy the protection that they currently do. But just bringing more of the same lawsuits will not do that. We need new legislation, and that's the issue I have with what Devin Nunes is doing, or as you've suggested, and I agree, what he's been coerced into doing. I think there's a real danger that this action being brought by Devin Nunes could actually hurt all of us, because there's a journalist who's being sued. She's a co-defendant along with Twitter, Devin Nunes' cow, at Devin Nunes' mom, not his actual mother, but a fictional Twitter handle. So if this lawsuit were to succeed, if hell froze over and the planets aligned and the lawsuit succeeded, it would be in direct conflict with the First Amendment, because even if we disagree with Liz Mayer, it's certainly within her rights to tweet out a headline, and I don't think that it's reasonable for a politician to bring a defamation suit simply because he disagrees with a journalist's opinion.
No, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. That just because if I put up a website that says the Trump cow or something like that, Trump can't sue me. I think you're hitting on a very important issue, and I would just tie it to a legislation that was made in the 1990s regarding cell tower technology. And I can't remember all the details, but essentially there was legislation passed in the 1990s which gave the telecommunications companies the ability to build cell towers, and the cell towers couldn't be blocked or interfered with by local municipalities. So they couldn't sue and stop them. And the 5G technology is using that law to say we can put up 5G technology on cell towers anywhere in the community. We have to get permission by the community, but no one can sue us and stop us because we're relying on this 1990s law. And I've went to these meetings and had discussions, and the whole premise of that law is not applicable to 5G technology, because the entire argument is 5G technology has a corrosive, debilitating, destructive effect on the human body, the human life. Therefore, it's unconstitutional. You have a right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Life, you have a right to your life. You have a right to live without the interference of damaging, destruction, radioactive waves from 5G technology. So you cannot put up a 5G tower if the citizen or citizens file a legal action or injunction saying this is causing damage to my health. It's like building microwaves without doors and putting them all around your house. So these laws in the 1990s do not apply to current technology, similar to the law that you're citing. May not apply to these situations.
Well, right. It's all part of the same Telecommunications Act of 1996, passed by guess who? Bill Clinton. So, see, this is what I'm getting at. And Devin Nunes squandering his political capital and squandering his ability to act as a congressman by bringing this pointless civil suit that frankly only has hope of damaging our rights, damaging our ability to act as citizens against these powerful social media and telecom companies. He's going in the totally wrong direction. And when I tried to bring it to the attention of people in his office, as you've said, they're too busy, they're not available, do you have a card? All they do is obfuscate and obstruct and try to keep you from actually delivering any information so that he can go sit in a meeting with Adam Schiff and listen to, whatever nonsense that moron is spewing.
I agree with you. The best defense is always to record your telephone calls on Skype or Zoom or wherever when you call these people. So you've got a record, and you always say, I'm calling on Skype, so it's recorded. You have a right to record your public officials, like you have a right to record your policemen with your cameras.
Right.
So these people can't be trusted, Jason. There are some very stupid people in the American Congress. And it's just the reality. But in one sense, people don't care about Congress and politics. They have a disgust for it. They want to make sure that they can play with their kids, eat their food, live in a house, and go to work and live a comfortable life. And that's, ultimately where the problems for Trump are going to arise, I think, are in his foreign policy, because his domestic policy is pretty sound. If you cut people's taxes, you give them liberty, you build a border, you have law and order, you throw Jussie Smollett in jail for the 16 counts, you throw the Kim Foxx in jail for conspiring to obstruct justice, you throw all of these people under an investigation for their corruption, obviously, you have a hearing on it, then you have redemption in the American people's eyes. But when you start to go to Venezuela and do a regime change, which personally I don't think is going to work. I think it's going to fizzle out because they haven't been doing it right. And the Venezuelan military is not abandoning Maduro. And it should have happened within the first month. After a month and it's trailing on, Maduro is going to arrest these people. He's going to have them killed. You already saw Guaido's chief of staff arrested. They're going to plant guns on these guys and say they were trying to overthrow the government. Here are the guns. And this whole thing's going to fizzle out. And Trump's going to have egg on his face because of John Bolton, because of these neocon, vicious, angry people that never served in the military. Pompeo, this fat idiot who was a metal worker before he went into Congress. All of these people are so delusionally drunk on, quote, the American Reagan-esque war against communism, right, even though communism really ended and all of this stuff ended. You're dealing with countries that may be socialist. You may not like it.
Well, wait a minute. Let me pause you for a second, Scott, because I think communism might be alive and well in the city of Chicago. I want to take you back to this Jesse Smollett matter. There's a headline story on True Pundit right now. A top FBI child trafficking and child prostitution task force chief was involved with the Chicago PD investigation of the Jesse Smollett hoax. And this story appears to be expanding in scope. Smollett's lawyer is saying he hasn't ruled out suing the city of Chicago. I think we have sort of transcended this era of, the law looking one way on black Americans and another way on white Americans, and we're deeply entrenched in this world of the law working one way for the politically connected, whatever race you might be, and another way for the rest of us. You certainly got the short end of the stick.
Oh, yeah. That's when I saw this. I thought, you're kidding me. 16 counts of making you're fraudulently trying to inspire a race war.
Doesn't that incite you? Doesn't that make you crazy that you went to jail for something you didn't do, and here's a guy who did a crime, 16 crimes, and is getting nothing?
In one respect, it absolutely does. It'll be used in an appropriate way, but of course, if I didn't go to prison, I would never have discovered all the material evidence to bring and reveal the deep state crimes of Hillary Clinton. It was the two pieces of bread between the meat and lettuce that I had already. Prison was the bread. But let me just say this, too. Jesse Smollett couldn't go down because he's gay, Jason. He represents the gay political.
I don't think that's it, though, Scott.
There's a gay activism. There's a gay liberal agenda that he represents and champions.
I think it's his political connections. I think it's his political connections. I mean, him being gay, I guess, plays into the story as far as, it makes him a more oppressed category. Well, he said that.
He said he identified himself as being gay as one of the reasons for his targeting. It wasn't just because he was black, MAGA country. He laid this out that he was part of his persecution was because of his gayness or whatever.
Yes, I agree. That's part of the story. Agenda. I agree with you completely. That's part of the story, and that was what they wanted. But I think this is another psychological operation head up by another gay black guy. Former President Barack Obama. But right. I think what we see happening here is way bigger than black, white, gay, straight. This is deep state in full view right here.
It is.
And, they're pivoting to another angle that I don't know what the full plan is here, but, we've been having a lot of conversation on David Hawkins' show about the Weather Underground and the Alinskyite Marxist communists in the 1960s who wanted to destroy the government, who were acting out, bombing the NYPD, bombing the Pentagon, bombing the U.S. Capitol. David mentioned this to me, and just the other day I realized that no one has ever connected, for me at least, the Weather Underground with the actions of 9/11. But Scott, they had the same targets. And Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dorn are not in jail where terrorists intent on destroying the U.S. government should be. They're on faculty at Northwestern University and the University of Illinois in Chicago. Bernardine Dorn mentored Michelle Obama. Bill Ayers is on record good friends with Obama. So what the hell is going on here?
Well, Leo Strauss, the father of neocon ideology, came out of the University of Chicago. So Chicago and Illinois, that whole pustule is rancid with this neocon fascism, and really it's statism. It's absolute humanism. George Bush and all of that were part of the push for that. That was Dick Cheney's ideology. That was all of their ideology. Francis Fukuyama, Leo Strauss, so many others. But I think you're right. This is deep state in full bloom. I think it will be crushed and collapsed under the weight of legal prosecution that will come with the federal prosecution for the letter writing, the fraudulent fake chemical attack he claimed, and all this other stuff could be thrown out. And these people could be imprisoned as well. The Fox, the attorney, the woman, the black woman who passed this down, and Michelle Obama's chief of staff that played a role in this by calling Fox. All of that could be corruption charges, and they could be imprisoned.
Absolutely. But to conspiracy, Kim Fox, and who's the woman who's the chief of staff for Michelle Obama?
Yeah, I can't remember her name. She's sort of an Asian woman.
Well, I don't care about her race. I mean, I'm just saying we've got some collusion going on here. The Chicago PD is up in arms. The fact that we would have a prosecutor step in or whatever this woman is, I think she's an attorney general or a district attorney or something like that. But this wasn't just an accusation brought by the police. This was presided over by a grand jury. They found, ample evidence to convict Jessie Smollett, and she's dismissed it. I find this not only to be a deep state operation, but incredibly stupid. Why didn't they just, put this guy on ice, schedule a trial for a year from now, have a hearing and say, you know what, he's a first-time offender, let's give him 6 months probation, and nobody would have said anything.
Yeah, that's true, Jason. That's very true. They've blown this up unnecessarily. They've made it personal. They've made it political. They've made it, really, they've made it a racial, gay privilege issue and a liberal Democrat issue. If you're aligned with these political powers, you are a morally pure priest of the high liberal ideology. So you're immune from any of these severe punishments for severe actions. So it is triggering, I think, a civil war awakening.
You've hit it right there, Scott, because this brings us back full circle to where we began with the New Zealand false flag operation. I think it's not about, some, special rights being granted to gay people or white people or black people or straight people. I think we just have to look at Saul Alinsky, rub raw the sores of discontent. If you're straight and you dislike gay people, if you're gay and you feel oppressed by straight people, if you're white, you're black, you're whatever, they're trying to, just like Sibel Edmonds reported that Brendan Tarrant had been in Turkey in 2016 in the same time frame where an ISIS suicide bomber was associated with the murder of 2 or 3 Jewish Turkish citizens, and now the same guy is associated with an operation that the only evidence we've seen appears to be fraudulent evidence. It's a murder of Muslims being blamed on white nationalists. All these things seem orchestrated to inflame the hatred of any group, and I think that's what's going on with the Jessie Smollett hoax.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, I think Trump is going to crush this because he's the president. He's got a new attorney general, and he's got a liberated Congress because the Mueller report is evaporated into smoke. They don't have any more smoke canisters, and now the opposite side is going to come crushing down on them like an avalanche. If they don't, then they're not worthy of remaining in power. Trump's not worthy of remaining in power. If he's going to be a limp noodle, get rid of him because we can't suffer that. I don't think he will. I think he'll come down as a hard crushing force. And I think Venezuela is going to be very quiet. With Russia having military personnel there, they've essentially secured that there will be no military conflict between the United States and Russia and Venezuela. Just won't happen.
You're right. I hope you're correct.
Trump would be removed instantly by the American people for that. That's why Tulsi Gabbard, I'll say again, she will most likely be the front runner if she sticks to it, because her message of peace is stronger and more attractive than all of the fanatical liberal Democrat candidates who have been making the Russia hoax their primary platform for the presidency. She's never been part of that. She's been part of, hey, let's stop the regime change Middle East wars, America going and kicking everybody's butt. That doesn't serve our people.
Yeah.
And that's a winning message. That's what Trump campaigned on. And then he pivoted because of John Bolton. And Syria and Russia, and look, Syria and Russia and the United States, there's not going to be a conflict there. Trump has been stymied and checkmated by Russia. So he can't do anything in Syria, and he shouldn't. And he can't do anything in Venezuela, and he should not. You can make an arrangement with Russia to say, look, we're going to have new elections in Venezuela. We're going to have they're going to honor their debts and their oil commitments to you, Russia. We're not going to take away your oil, and we're not going to engage in millions of people spreading across Central America up into the southern border of the United States. We simply want to remove Maduro and have a new election of a new person, and it may not be Guaido. It could be someone totally different. I think that's how it's going to play out. And I think
it's a little weird for the United States to flex its political muscles when we don't like the president of a country and make a deal with another country to, have a new election and get a new president in there. Scott, Charlene Stewart is watching us on Crowdsource the Truth 2 on YouTube, and she makes the point that Jussie Smollett made it about Trump and supporters, which is an excellent point, because this is just another way that they're trying to, fight Trump. The Robert Mueller investigation essentially failed to provoke an impeachment or provide any valid evidence that would allow that type of thing to go through. So now we're going to see Democrats and other opponents of Donald Trump just laser beam focused on disrupting his 2020 campaign, which frankly, if the election were tomorrow, I think would be an historic landslide. But with that, Scott, we are almost out of time here. I do want to remind people to visit shellgamewhistleblower.com and purchase Scott's books. They can read all about the evidence we've been discussing in Shell Game by purchasing the book. How can people get a signed copy of Shell Game, Scott?
Well, you can email me at shellgamewhistleblower.com, and I'll be happy to send a signed edition. I'm happy to do that.
Wonderful. And, we'll be back next week talking about more of this stuff. I want to thank you for joining me. And I want to remind everybody that Crowdsource the Truth is a viewer-supported news resource. So if people are enjoying the shows, I hope they will go to patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. We've got a lot of exclusive video content there. And if you want to see the conversation that Scott and I had last week, analyzing the New Zealand evidence, where his incredible experience in the military and knowledge of firearms, coupled with my experience in digital video processing and motion picture production, gave what I think is one of the most unique analyses of that footage. You can also see that at patreon.com/shellgames. So that's Scott's page, and it's really important that people also support the guests that appear on Crowdsource the Truth. So please go there. And I want to thank everybody for watching. I've got a packed day of broadcasting, so I will be back later today at 5 p.m. where Laura Loomer is going to be reporting on her experiences. She's just gotten back, Scott, from Woodland Hills, where this might surprise you, but she was kicked out of a Ilhan Omar event over there.
Oh. Yeah,
so
Omar is disintegrating. Omar is disintegrating. Every time she says people should raise hell and get mad, she's just making herself a pariah.
Yeah, so we'll tune in at 5 p.m. to see that. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Scott, I'll see you next week.
Thank you, brother. You're doing a great job.
Thank you. Take care.